Hello, this is Mike Swanson. This is a special segment of the Past American Century because I got two very special guests with me. I'm speaking with Carmine Savastano, who's been on the show, of course, several times, author of Two Princes of King, but I'm also with Larry Hancock, who has written multiple classic books about parapolitics, intelligence operations, all sorts of topics, from surprise attack, which is from Pearl Harbor to 9/11 to Benghazi, to a book about the Martin Luther King assassination, The Awful Grace of God, Shadow Warfare, Someone Would Have Talked, and Nexus, multiple other books too. But today I got them both to talk about their areas of specialty when it comes to some of the assassinations in the 1960s. And I'm curious about could hypnosis, mind control, and psychological things have been done to some of these assassins or accused assassins to put them in the situations they were in. Movies such as The Manchurian Candidate kind of served as a precursor to this idea, but when it comes to some of these assassinations, such as assassins, such as Sirhan Sirhan, there's been a lot of speculation over the decades that that's exactly what happened, that he was hypnotized somehow. And even some people suspect that with Oswald, and some of these other assassins were so strange, such as John Hinckley, who shot Reagan, and Arthur Bremer, who shot George Wallace, that you wonder, how can someone be this crazy? So what do you think, Carmine?
Well, I think that, it's it's a very complex topic that over the years has gotten more and more muddied by people speculating on things and not really understanding the nature of how some of these things work, and that we, don't always know all of the mental or pre-existing biological conditions with the people concerned. Some people are obsessive. They'll obsess on a target and eventually they'll carry something out. They can be delusional. Some people are just by nature of what, they could have a mental injury like people we've talked about on the show before, and that will affect their behavior, and their behavior won't be easily explained, and it's an easier catch-all solution to just say, well, they were mind controlled, or, well, it's just, you don't have to explain it. You can just forego the investigation or inquiry and just say, well, this appears to be, unexplainable, so it's got to be some outside force that's making it happen, when it's usually more internal. There are limits to, the sorts of control that people can use. We have several ancient mythologies that, anyone can just, you can Google and see there are creatures, ranging from like the sirens that would lure, sailors to their dooms, all the way to vampires who would stalk the night looking for a victim whose will they could subsume. So mind control's always been around. It's something to explain why we do the things we do without having to ascribe personal responsibility in some cases. People use monster myths to have alien thoughts and behaviors that they don't want to have a mundane solution to.
Well, as a cultural phenomenon, as you said, it's been around since probably the dawn of time. And yeah, the vampire movies. Another example that comes to my mind is there's 100 years ago, there was a notion of mesmerism that was real popular in society all over the world, especially in Germany and the United States. And it was sort of linked to mind control. They had people who could mesmerize you, and even the stock market there's something, a ticker tape could, if you interacted with that, it could take over your mind and make you do crazy things. But that idea kind of passed away, and then vampires, kind of all these vampire movies in the 30s and 40s and so forth. But in the 50s and 60s, it is true that the Central Intelligence Agency and even the U.S. Army had a couple programs where they were doing psychological experiments. There were prisoners in the Korean War that appear to have been somehow mind controlled by the Chinese, that they were making these bizarre confessions of committing horrible war crimes that they probably didn't do, and so they must have been mind controlled. And the CIA was trying to unlock how they were doing that. And in the 70s, they had a program called MK Ultra that was exposed in the 1970s. So there has been research done by American intelligence agencies into these topics. So is it possible that they learned some things and applied them and used them?
Well, here's the thing. MK Ultra occurred, I believe, it began in 1953. So we have to look not only at MK Ultra. So we, as you and I both affirm the history of monsters, religious reasons. People even and there were religious attributions too. I think it was like the Norse warriors used to claim they could go into a hypnotic berserker state, and then they could turn into bears and wolves. So it's been around a while, and it's an explanation for things that people couldn't figure out on their own. And though the CIA did eventually begin those programs were influenced not only by our natural desire to look into it, but there were actually specific people that influenced that happening. One of them was a man named Edward Hunter, and he was a member of the Morale Division of the Office of Strategic Services, which, if the listeners don't know, was a military predecessor group to the Central Intelligence Agency. And then he later gained employment with the CIA and engaged in propaganda operations. And among those claims that he was putting out when he was doing propaganda operations was brainwashing. And he called it a mystical Eastern practice that Western officials did not understand. And this idea provides what I said earlier, that easy excuse. And for them, it was for why people embrace communism. And it's perfect. It leads right into the Red Scare. Hunter claims that in media he observed Chinese communist leaders using, quote, terrifying ancient techniques to turn the Chinese people into mindless communist automations.
Well, that sounds like a scary thing to see happen.
and of course the CIA goes, well, if they can do it, then we need to do it.
Add a little bit of context, too. You got to remember that coming out of World War II, one of the things that had become very important during World War II, and at the time we thought was amazingly successful, was a new concept called psychological warfare. And whole Army directorates were created to do psychological warfare. After the war, actually, there was an office of psychological warfare that was a predecessor to the CIA. Psychological warfare through the period of the Korean War was thought to be a major tool. Over time, it was turned into also, as Carmine's going, partly an excuse. I mean, you had to explain some of the statements that the Korean War prisoners were giving. You had to explain why so many nations were suddenly going communist or socialist when, before the war they'd been very happy just to be colonies, right? And then after the war, suddenly they're not happy to be colonies. So it must be the red influence. There must be some kind of psychological warfare at work that created them. So to some extent, the move to psychological warfare, the belief in psychological warfare became self-justified because you could use it to explain a lot of things that you really didn't want to face up to otherwise.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you want to say something, Mike, or I was just going to add it with Larry's.
I was just going to say that, I told you this the other day, Carmine, that when there's a complicated subject or topic in which there's no way to get a definitive answer, and I would say, why a colony, why a former colony is no longer a colony and the people don't ever want to be a colony again, that can be a complicated question to try to answer. And things that are so complicated, simple solutions often provide an answer that people grasp onto.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree with both your and Larry's assessments. I think that it is a complex, hypnotism itself and the other things, we're going to talk about, they're all complex subjects. You can't just say that a few pieces of anecdotal evidence explain the entire thing. It's a mistake. You always want to bring in more evidence. And if you leap to that conclusion, it's going to become, as Larry said, self-justifying, just as the CIA did. You know, we have, before the CIA even began in anything, this was propaganda. So, I mean, in one way, the CIA has sort of affected the entire history of what people think mind control and hypnotism are. But that's not exactly what they are. And they don't allow the powers that people assume. And, you know, so you had Hunter pushing this. You then have his superiors at the CIA take it up for MK Ultra, and what they do is not mind control people. They traumatize them. They do shatter some minds. They do get some people to do what they want, but it's always under control. That's the problem. The problem with a lot of these, with indoctrination, which you'll see with religions or cults, and anywhere in between, and with social groups, you'll see it with military groups, you'll see it with governmental groups. They want to indoctrinate people, and indoctrination is the application of information without criticism, without question.
How do they do that?
Well, for instance, short term, like in the case of the Korean War prisoners that you talked about, violence. They beat them into submission to give the statement they want, or they beat them some more. Now, if they want to make it last, they use mental primarily. They can incorporate a little physical here and there, but mental conditioning, the sort of akin to brainwashing that people want to believe in, takes several, 6 to 8 weeks, months, years to be really effective, to last. And even that, they noticed when they were debriefing prisoners of war that were held for years, would eventually fade. Because once you are out of the control of your captor, they can't keep reinforcing it. And like, as you were saying, what exactly would they do? The mental, for instance, they would do 5 hours a day of confessions and basically breaking down the will of a person. You admit that you're a liar. You admit that you're scum. You admit that the country you serve is evil, and that you have been misled by them, and that the true way is communism, and that you must submit to communism. And, day after day of this, year after year, sure, you're going to get someone to think more the way you want them to, because they're going to be broken down. But they still retain their will. They're still not a puppet. You can't just pull out the marionette strings and make them do what you want.
And I'll add that it works. Another tactic that was used was deprivation. You take someone, lock them up in a dark room, no sensory, and the Koreans were quite good at this. Little Russian advice: no stimuli at all. Lock them up, leave them in the dark, leave them with no noise. No one's talking to them for a couple of weeks. It's amazing. You get to the point where you're pretty much willing to talk to anybody. We see the same thing in captives that are taken in terrorist acts. Suddenly they begin to identify with their captors. Why? Because that's the only sensory input that they're getting. So there are psychological tactics that come into play, but this is not like throwing a switch. You don't have one session with the person and it sticks. And even under those cases, even under the intense months long, you may get them to make a statement. You may get them to go on radio like Patty Hearst, okay, TV, I'm supporting, but then years later, it doesn't stick long term, but it can work for a while. So these are known tactics. It's not like it's magic.
Yeah. It's just, I think people, they let their imagination run wild, and it becomes not just a method of influencing, but a method of control. There's always that voluntary element that has to exist. Nobody can, you can't look into their eyes, like Mike was talking about mesmerism. The concept of mesmerism was that it was basically a mystical animal power you had of attraction, that you could mesmerize someone. And though that was nonsense, the methods that Franz Mesmer used could actually be replicated. But, if you don't mind, I'll jump into hypnotism, and then we can go, if you want, more directly into Sirhan.
Well, I think that hypnotism is real important because, like I was telling you the other day, kind of silly, but when I was a kid, I used to watch Doctor Who, and they had a character on there called the Master, and he was evil, and he would just hypnotize people by just looking at them, and he would say, "You're going to obey me," and they would do it for the rest of the show, and they would even kill people for him, just like that. But he had such powerful hypnotic abilities, and I think prisoners of war and terrorists. Uh, we're almost speaking, you can influence people, get them to confess, and so forth. But to get someone to kill somebody or be an assassin, that takes a much bigger level of control. And it seems like it would take real powerful hypnosis to achieve that. So I know Larry's done a lot of study into the Sirhan Sirhan case, and that's probably the one that is most likely in the 1960s where that happened. I really don't know of any evidence that Oswald was hypnotized or James Earl Ray, but by all accounts, Sirhan Sirhan could be hypnotized at the drop of a dime. He had some psychiatrist visit him in jail and said something like that.
Well, and maybe I can give some background on that, and then Carmine can go into the actual techniques used. But absolutely, Sirhan. There's no mystery about Sirhan and hypnosis, not just hypnosis. Where Sirhan was eager to talk to his friends, to his family. Sirhan had gone through a period of probably 2 years or more where he had been exploring various psychic techniques, if you will. They had started, he actually met up with a New Age guru type called Tom Rathke, who he worked with at one of the racetracks. And Rathke was very much into visualization, self-improvement, many of the New Age techniques of the late 60s. And he maintained a relationship with Rathke and communicated with him for a considerable period of time. He went through hypnosis with stage musicians in local clubs. We know that. He did it with the Rosicrucians when he became interested in some of their mind improvement techniques. Sirhan was all about improving his own will to impress people, to make an impression, to whether it be something like as simple as getting a date with a girl, or he actually went so far as he carried some of his own visualization and self-hypnosis techniques to the point where he thought he could physically control not only other people, but we have documented instances where he would tell friends that he could control when his mother went to the restroom in the house. He would focus on that, and he would not. He would focus, and then she would go. And well, if he was around my place, that would have been easy enough. But anyway, he visualized he could make horses win races, and that he wanted to be able to control them. So the association of Sirhan with these techniques, whether it's visualization, self-hypnosis, his brothers talked openly about him using a technique where you stare at a candle to do self-hypnosis. He talked about using a mirror. So the fact that anyone would find Sirhan was amenable to hypnosis, you're looking at after he's been studying and practicing those techniques for a considerable period of time and making he would brag about it to friends and family. So it's not something he tried to cover up either. If you got in contact with Sirhan and established any kind of dialogue, it wouldn't take you long to know A, something about his politics, and B, something about his interest in psychic phenomena. And it actually got so bad, I want to put this in before we leave that Lynn Magnan, who was a friend of the family and worked on the Sirhan case for years, actually was a neighbor. And when she was in the house, she actually discovered a letter that Rathke had written to Sirhan. And this was, only a few months before the assassination, and Rathke was essentially warning Sirhan that if he didn't stop some of the things that he was doing with his techniques, that something really terrible was going to happen. So even Rathke, who has been his mentor, was saying that Sirhan was taking this stuff places it shouldn't go.
What do you think he thought? That he was afraid he might drive himself crazy or something?
I think he thought he was using techniques that lead to action.
Oh.
No, that you're with the visualization techniques. It's like, I mean, Sirhan himself visualized seeing Robert Kennedy in a mirror and doing something about Robert Kennedy. I think Rathke realized that it had gone beyond self-improvement to self-fulfillment. You know, you're actually getting your in a state. Well, again, some of these techniques are very mainline where you visualize that you can do well in sports. You lay this all out in your mind and you repeat it so well that it's no longer just something in your mind. When you get in the right on the tennis court, on the basketball court, you've acted it out and you actually do it. So I think he saw that Sirhan was moving closer to doing something than just improving himself.
Well, and I would agree with Larry's assessment. I think that that's wholly reasonable, and that plays into the actual science we know. The problem with hypnosis is that there is no defined set tenets of hypnosis. If you look, you can look, there are some medical associations and there are some dental associations that do think it has useful effects in certain people, but there is no universal method that works. You cannot hypnotize everyone, that's first of all. And then beyond that, you cannot hypnotize some people. You cannot know for sure what the effects are going to be until after you try it. So there is no assurance that it's going to happen, let alone that you can control someone like a puppet. The problem is that it's voluntary. The subject has to want to be hypnotized. For instance, as in what Larry was saying about Sirhan, his visualization and self-actualization required him to want it. He wasn't hypnotized into doing it. He was doing it to become hypnotized.
Well, is there any evidence of, or I mean, is there any account besides the RFK assassination? But is there any account of any instance where someone was hypnotized into carrying out a criminal act of that extent?
No, the problem is you can't force somebody to do a series of complex actions without them wanting to do it. And the more you act outside of their morality, the less likely it is to work. You can look at, there actually the at least partially scientifically based organizations that do exist. There are one I looked into was he's a professor of psychiatry at Northeastern Ohio Medical University, and he's the president of the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis. His name's Moshe Torum, and he says that hypnosis is just a tool that helps in making what you're trying to do easier. It isn't of itself the way to do it. Even in the scientific studies that have been done, I think it was over 50, they found that hypnosis doesn't work without that voluntary mechanism, and if you try to force it, it'll fail. And now add all that in to what Larry has said already existing about Sirhan, and now throw in the mental damage from his head injury. So now you don't
what
even know.
What happened
to him? He was thrown from a horse that he was working on when he was at a racetrack. So, and it did extensive damage that is debated. Some say that it was not that bad, so it wouldn't provide any sort of, because they want to believe the official story and they don't want to give him an out for being mentally incapacitated, so they say it wasn't that bad. Some people say that he had a black eye and significant damage that kept him down for a while. So, but we don't know. We don't know the extent. So that's another variable you're throwing in. If you take a head injury, I mean, there are people that have had head injuries that are suddenly better at math or can play the piano or are reduced to, a gibbering mass on the floor and they can't recover. So we don't know how that would play into mind control attempts. And people don't think about that. They just think it's some sort of straight line from, well, this was done to him, and this is why he did it. No, that's not how our minds work. We don't understand our minds enough to be able to say
Let me
that.
ask y'all this. I'm trying to get my thinking straight as we're talking about this, and anyone listening too, because these are words that kind of are used interchangeably, and it can get confusing. So for earlier, Larry was talking about prisoners, and he mentioned China and communism. And back in the 1950s, the term brainwashing was used a lot, in particular in regard to these Korean prisoners of war. But communist brainwashing, that was kind of a buzzword in the 1950s. And that was supposed to be a form of brainwashing. And in my thinking, I'll just see if you all agree with this, but I would think brainwashing is more akin to indoctrination, like a political indoctrination, or being influenced by propaganda. The communist study groups are a really intense form of that. The Chinese used to do that. Mao, they had these little red books, and everyone a couple times a day in the factories would have to gather together and read from the red books and chant and stuff. So it's real hardcore indoctrination, and so I think of that as a sort of the brainwashing type of the 1950s that was probably really happening. But the type of mind control that it takes to get someone to commit murder or something, that's a much different thing. And I think that's why the hypnosis is so important. I think hypnosis is necessary to make that happen. If hypnosis can even work, it's going to take something beyond simple indoctrination and so-called brainwashing, as I'm using the phrase. But maybe I'm not using the brainwashing phrase correctly.
Well,
No,
but
you're absolutely right. That's the whole brainwashing was a simple way of saying, okay, you thought what you thought. Now I'm going to make that go away, and you're going to think like I want you to think. That brainwashing. We cleaned the brain and we replaced.
and well, yeah, and
Indoctrination. It's not hypnosis. It's not control. We replaced a mindset to a certain extent, at least.
and that was all Hunter's work. That was his. And the question is was that always a morale operation and propaganda operation to give people like the CIA the excuse for why this was happening, instead of maybe they didn't give these guys the necessary defenses mentally to resist, or maybe they didn't explain to them the best ways to counter it or go along with it until you had a better chance maybe to escape, or you had some way to communicate. I don't think they saw this coming. We in America, while indoctrination certainly is practiced, throughout society and religions and in groups and in military, it isn't to that extent. The communists might have been able to perfect it to such an extent to where it could actually make you act in ways that people would think unthinkable, but it can't make you still have that voluntary choice. They can't make you kill people. You can be driven to fear or traumatized so badly that you'd consider doing it and maybe break down and do it, but they can't make you. You have to make the choice.
Let's step it up then. So take away brainwashing. I think it really is important to delineate between indoctrination versus something like visualization, self-improvement, these techniques where you're trying to help yourself to control. And where Carmine was with hypnosis is what people are looking for is, it's kind of like the master, as you said, on Doctor Who. Watch that too. I look at you, you do exactly what I want you to do. I take over. But so, Carmine, from that, I know everybody that's listening to this is immediately going to go on Google, and they're going to look up hypnosis, and they're going to find a video of a guy who hypnotized somebody and got them to take a gun and point it at someone and pull the trigger. I know you're going to see that video. I've seen that video. So, how do you deal with that?
Well, what I would respond to them is, okay, so that is a one in how many thousands of people that could happen. So we now reduce it to that 1 in thousands. Now, the 1 in thousands, that specific person, what they are then, if they want to say that Sirhan is just like that specific person, then okay, so we're foregoing all of the biological. Let's say he is. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. He's just like them. Well, he's not just like them because he had a massive head injury. He had an entirely traumatic life where his father abandoned him and his family in a foreign country after they had moved from a war zone. And then he was brought up by brothers who then replaced his father as the masculine image in his mind, who beat him consistently. So he was traumatized. He was highly traumatized. Then as he got older, he then was locked into a pretty much indoctrination method of at least two of his older brothers, perhaps more, constantly talking about what was wrong with America, about what the Kennedys were doing against Palestine, about how much they hated Israel, and about how much Jewish people were evil. So a few years of that added on to a brand new brain injury he suffers from the horses, and he's doing all this self-actualization, and he's being warned by people that something's going to go wrong. I think the path is opening up, and it doesn't require mind control.
Well, and I would say even if you step away, there are certain things that you don't have to do. We know that Sirhan practiced with a pistol. Nobody had to put a pistol in his hand and say, go shoot someone. He practiced with a pistol. He liked a pistol. His brother bought a pistol for him. His brother knew he was going to use the pistol for something probably untoward, not just target practice. And he admitted that to the police. So we don't have to, in this particular case, we don't have to convince Sirhan to like guns, to use a pistol, to fire a pistol, to become a moderately decent shot because he goes to the gun range and practice. We didn't have to hypnotize him to do that, and he does that over an extended period of time. We also don't have to make him dislike Robert Kennedy, so this isn't we don't have to impose this target on him because it's quite clear why he didn't like RFK, and he would tell you that and did in court. And so there are a lot of things that you don't have to do. Now, could you reinforce him with hypnotism? Did he reinforce himself? I guess I would maintain that doesn't mean that hypnotism doesn't come into play, but it's certainly not control, because you don't have to control him to make him to bring all the elements into play. He's willing, and actually, otherwise you have to write off. And if you want to take that view, you have to write off all the evidence in his notebooks, in scraps of paper, and people that he talked to, where he says he wants to kill RFK. Did somebody hypnotize him to make him do that, or to push him over the edge to write that?
That's totally reasonable. That's possible.
Well,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was going to say, he's right at the precipice. He's primed himself to be used. That's certainly reasonable that somebody could have pushed him off the edge of the cliff. He led himself right to the edge. So that makes a lot of sense, and we can at least prove one criminal conspiracy between him and Munir because of the gun. So he couldn't have done it without the means provided to him. So, and the other shooter, he couldn't have killed RFK either based on the ballistics or the forensics evidence. So there's still a conspiracy there, but it doesn't need to be this mind control idea that people push.
Well, if we just drop the idea of mind control and just assume that, he wanted to shoot RFK and he told other people and everything that Larry said, and it's in the record, that doesn't hold out that he could have been manipulated by others, positioned in that pantry or whatever, and so that's a form of control.
Nice. You're really trying to give him something to hold on to, huh?
Well,
like you stand over there, control. Yes, I think I think you bring up a good point, and I think that's where the devil is in the details, and Carmine and I discussed this many times. There are perfectly viable reports that other people were talking to Sirhan, other people were interacting with him, before the assassination and that night, that there were other people interacting with him. And I will have to say, in the series of essays I wrote on this, my view is that you can trace those interactions over a period of some 2 hours to actually put him in the service hallway where the shooting occurs. Um, because the concept is, and one of the things you have to deal with is, you can't be too structured about this. If you're into real mind control, what are the parameters that you're going to give someone? It's just like, if you see him, you shoot. Well, how is that? If you see him within 2 feet, you shoot. If you see him within 20 feet, you shoot. Shoot from what? If you really want control, what are the parameters? And one of the things we do know is that it could not have been planned in advance that he was going to encounter RFK in that service hallway, because RFK was supposed to come and go through the ballroom, out in the open, meeting the crowds. It was not until like 45 minutes before he actually spoke that RFK himself decided he wanted to go in through the pantryway. Only at that point could you have even anticipated where to put Sirhan to make the shooting happen, unless Sirhan, but that's the only point where the attack gels.
And I would add to that, yeah. So the not only is he not going to have any foreknowledge, which would then imply that it would be a looser, smaller plot than the grand plot that some people want to claim it is. And there is substantial evidence to show that Sirhan, at the very least, was aided by one, probably more, and it isn't a coincidence. He didn't just show up there by chance that night to shoot when another shooter was firing. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So of course, there's more to this, but we need to build off of the evidence. We need to build off of what we can prove, not what people want to have happened, because those catch-alls never solve anything. They just throw it down the road, and then somebody else has to come and do the work later.
Which is kind of the criminal response to, no, all those colonies suddenly didn't give up wanting to be colonies because they were criticized by the communists. No, simple answers are not really answers.
Yeah. They're they're excuses. They're excuses to push it down the road.
Well, I mean, in some ways, the RFK assassination is more. It's strange because on one hand, the evidence is probably the most obvious that something is fishy, because the coroner's report shows that Robert Kennedy was shot from the back of the head with a gun that was only inches away when Sirhan was in front of him, several feet away. So there's, the actual medical evidence and so forth is much more obvious that there's something suspicious happening here. However, beyond that, it seems, at first glance, at least, to be very difficult to know what is behind all this, or who is Sirhan, what's he up to, who's the shooter, who's behind this thing. So I think the idea that he was just hypnotized is an attractive idea to believe in, because then you don't have to figure out what Sirhan was doing anymore. He doesn't matter.
Well, and unfortunately, it is also used, and I understand the motivation of some people to do it, but it's used as a way to try to abrogate any guilt from Sirhan, which anyone who honestly assesses this, it is ridiculous to say that he is totally innocent. Just like I would contend, the same in any of the main 3 assassination cases, especially with JFK. They have a connection. It's really, as where Oswald has some plausible deniability with some things, Sirhan doesn't. Like Larry said, he practiced. He has all this trauma laid upon him. He has all these, instead of going as where his brother Munir kind of began to act out and get arrested, Sirhan kind of went inward. And then he did the things that Larry was talking about, where self-actualization, he's trying to look for things, trying to make himself better, trying to use mystical means to do something rather than sociable means. He became, more introspective. And as that happened, the pathway began to open up. You know, these things started to happen. He encountered the New Age guru that Larry talked about. You know, he tried to control his mind, and he was already traumatized. Oh, another thing was his sister died when he was young of cancer. So, I mean, or of leukemia, you know, a type of cancer. But, you know, the road was already laid, and it doesn't require anything more than what we know to do so. And unfortunately, we have people trying to say that he's totally innocent, which he isn't. He fired a gun into a room full of people. You know, that's attempted murder. That's multiple counts of attempted murder. That doesn't mean he's guilty of killing RFK. He's not, based on the evidence. But he still did fire the gun. He did show up. He was voluntarily writing RFK over and over must die in his notebook. The hypnotism didn't make him write that. He did those things to become hypnotized, to self-actualize.
Well, where do you think the RFK case is going?
Well, it's interesting because even today, you know, Sirhan would tell you that other people must have been involved. He admits that the polka dot dress girl. He says he doesn't understand it, but somehow she had an effect on him. So it's like everybody in the world except the Los Angeles Police Department has to face up to the fact that there was a conspiracy and there were other people involved. And quite frankly, if you look at the LAPD's internal memos, they absolutely knew it was a conspiracy and they couldn't find who it was, and so they just wanted out. You know, they pretty much, you know, one thing you've always got to point out in these cases is prosecutors hate conspiracies. When they have somebody in hand,
Loose ends.
that applies to Lee Oswald. It applies to all these cases. If they've got somebody in hand with a gun that they can trace to them, they don't want a conspiracy. They want to win a case in court and make everybody feel good about it. So where the case has ended up is officially LAPD blew it. Officially, the case is closed, and they're just, as much as the lawyers will, all that they can really do is appeal Sirhan's conviction. None of that would take. This case has been re-examined by the California penal system 3 different times back in the 70s. I mean, this was a big thing in the 70s. We kind of think of it as a big thing now, whatever, but it was reopened. There were hearings, there were reinvestigations, and every time they looked at it again, they saw how screwed up the evidence handling had been by LAPD, and everybody just kind of went, oops, we don't really want to look at this anymore. Let's bail. He's in jail, leave him there. So an honest answer is, the best efforts that are being made now are really to get him released because the evidence in hand proves that he was an accessory and not a murderer. But nobody is revisiting from even his own lawyers have not, there's no way to revisit the crime itself that I'm aware of. That's not what they're challenging. They're challenging his sentence, not the crime. Carmine?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that beyond what I want to see, I would like to see Sirhan released because he didn't commit the crime as alleged. I would like to see it acknowledged that he's not the only person that they knew was part of the crime. And I think that might be harder than getting Sirhan released, is getting them to say, yeah, we knew Mir helped him, but we also knew that might blow our case and we didn't want everybody to walk. So, as Larry said, they want gun in hand, they want one guy, because otherwise reasonable doubt exists. And if reasonable doubt exists, they can walk. And they don't want that to happen, because then they'll look like fools.
Well, I have no idea who was responsible for this thing, you know.
Well, neither did they. They had no idea either.
Probably not. And I'm not going to ask y'all to speculate on it. I don't like it when people ask me, you know, who do I think did this or that, and you know, it's hard to, you can't just give a pat answer to something that's complicated.
this takes us back. I think we have to step back and look.
Mm.
The whole point here was control and hypnosis. And the point, quite frankly, is if those tactics worked, and if the CIA could have made them work, they would have made them work, and that's what they would have done. And what they found out is they really didn't work. They weren't replicable, and they gave up the project. You know, that's why we find, well, let's be honest, if those techniques worked, would we find in this century Russian agents in Britain using radioactive poison that trace back to Russian agents? I mean, no, this stuff is, obviously there is no better technique than what we see every day. I mean, do I have to send an assassination squad into an embassy and cut somebody up in my own embassy? You know, if I had mind control,
Exactly.
I have to do that kind of thing.
Well,
It's just, it's insane to think that it works when you look at how things are still occurring.
yeah. Look at all the mistakes that they've made. If they could mind control people, they would have either forgotten about, we would have all forgotten about these mistakes, or we wouldn't be talking about any of this right now.
Mr. Khashoggi would have been in a car accident with a mind-controlled driver. You know,
Well, it might be safer than some of these robot cars. I don't.
this is real life. This is real. You know, if you could control things this methodically with mind control assassins, you wouldn't be doing this other stupid stuff.
Yeah, mind control is best left to Richard Condon's book and movie.
Well, there's Doctor Who episodes that they were fun to watch, but when I was a kid. But I guess we've been talking. Yeah, well, we've been talking for quite some time. I don't want to keep y'all too much longer, so just let y'all have the last word. Does this relate to anything either one of y'all are working on now?
Oh, actually, yeah. As far as I'm working on a book right now that's going to be coming out later this year, and I'll keep everybody informed in future episodes. But it does kind of play into just the not necessarily mind control, but mental influencing, and how we can be influenced by not just torture in the ways that governments try to mentally influence people, but also by the things around us, like for instance social media, by our emotions being amplified by technology. And I think that one of the things I cover in the book is some of the questions that people usually don't ask, or are only asked in very small circles, about what the long-term effects are, and why we might be seeing sort of destabilizing things occur, as far as human relationships. If you look, there's actually a marked decline in research over time of interpersonal relationships occurring, because people are actually spending more time either online developing relationships there, or on their phone, involved doing something there, games, apps, whatever you might have interest in. And that's actually disengaging them from what before would have been normal social interactions that they might have had. So I think that this does, we don't understand our minds nearly as well as we think we do. And there's a lot of biological and environmental factors that play into, why we do the things we do. And the overall arching idea of the book is just to discuss, some of the facets of human aggression, and why we can be so violent and domineering and not even understand what we're doing sometimes. So I think there definitely is it's not an external force that makes us do the things we do. It's misunderstood internal forces and our environment that can make them manifest, I think is the interesting part of what I'm working on.
Well, I'll be looking forward to reading that. And I know Larry's put out something around September, Creating Chaos, a book called Creating Chaos, which kind of touches on political indoctrination and propaganda from, I think, before the Cold War up until the present. I know talks a lot about Putin in the book.
It starts with the Truman era, just post-war, at the end of the war, you know, and it creating chaos is really about political warfare and how propaganda, manipulation. There's no how the game of political warfare is played and has been played forever between the empires, between Russian Empire, British Empire. This is a very old game. The tactics. I think the problem is that the tactics are tried and true, but what has kind of taken us by surprise in this century, and only starting a few years ago, circa about 2014, 2015, that the exponential effectiveness in those tactics when you apply them to social media. And, and a lot of the book is about the transition from how political warfare was conducted in the pre-global internet world as to how it's being done now. And it's like a lot of contemporary detail and studies of how different parties are using it now and how it's really has become so much more dangerous. As Carmine said, what goes on inside our head is our fault, but how that can be manipulated from the outside, especially over social media, is truly frightening. So yeah, I've been playing around in this genre of manipulation from a different standpoint. Basically, you know, manipulation from the media standpoint rather than anything direct like hypnosis or visualization, any of those things.
Well, I recommend everyone get that book, and I'm going to get it. I don't have it. I've got most of your other books, but this is one I don't actually have. So, and I know it would interest me. So I'm going to order it and drop you an email when I'm done reading it.
Oh, I love talking about it. Everybody, I continue to have chats with lots of my readers. I enjoy doing that.
Great. Well, thanks both of you for taking your time to talk with me and everyone else that might be listening out there in YouTube land, and hope we all talk again soon.
Thanks for having us, Mike. We appreciate it, and that was great to talk with you and Larry again.